afternoon session. Welcome back to the afternoon session. I hope the first three sessions on the discovery and the regulatory were useful, and we now move on to an important aspect that yes, we want to do research and we have to do the clinical studies or clinical trials. But how do we source the funding? Where do we get funding? Who funds early stage ideas? And also, how do we prepare for funding? What would the funders look at is what we will be discussing. And very happy that this session is taken by my colleagues, Dr. Vishal Bharadwaj and Dr. Swati Subodh. Again, for the record, the workshop is being conducted as CCAMP is part of the CARB-X GAN or the Global Accelerator Network, one of 6 world-class accelerators around the globe that support the development of new antibiotics and other life-saving products to fight drug-resistant bacteria. Also, CCAMP, we are proud as well as humbled that we are the only accelerator outside of the US and Europe to be selected by CARB-X as a global accelerator for their network for AMR. A disclaimer before we begin. The content of these presentations is supported by CARB-X. CARB-X's funding is sponsored by the Cooperative Agreement Number ID SEP 160030 from ASPR, BARDA, and by awards from the Wellcome Trust, Germany's Federal Ministry of Education and Research, the UK Global Antimicrobial Resistance Innovation Fund, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The content is solely the responsibility of the authors and does not necessarily represent the official views of CARB-X or its funders. With that, I would like to introduce our first speaker and my colleague, Dr. Vishal Bharadwaj. Dr. Bharadwaj obtained a bachelor's in human biology from AIMS, New Delhi, All India Institute of Medical Sciences. After that, he joined an integrated master's and PhD program at the National Center for Biological Sciences, NCBS, in Bangalore, and mostly focused on the biochemical and biophysical aspects of intracellular protein aggregates. He has also carried out a short postdoctoral stint at NCBS, after which he joined our team at CCAMP as a senior scientific consultant. At CCAMP, Dr. Bharadwaj mostly engages with academic innovators and aspiring bioentrepreneurs through several different programs related to funding, mentoring, and translation of research. Vishal today will speak to us about the funding schemes of the government, and most of them which are disbursed or managed by CCAMP. And he will also touch upon how, when you apply for funds, how you should prepare, what are the kinds of documentation and what the kind of due diligence that typically a evaluation committee would do. And he will also share his or his colleague's email address for you to get in touch with should you wish to apply for funding. His talk will be followed by a talk by Dr. Swati Subodh, a colleague of mine on the AMR team. She's the lead science and policy lead at CCAMP for AMR, and is a scientist and healthcare professional in the field of infectious disease, and has a vast experience over 20 years in the field. Her work has spanned from basic research, science research in molecular biology and genomics of the infecting pathogen, to the identification and implementation of high potential innovations for better public health outcomes. She has several peer-reviewed publications, patents, and projects, both government and industry supported, to her credit. Prior to joining us at CCAMP, she was with India Health Fund, which is an initiative of the Tata Trusts, and before that at CSIR in various capacities, and at AIMS, New Delhi. She has written many highly read articles, columns, features in international and national media. She will be talking to us primarily about the funding support that CARB-X provides to innovators, and also will touch upon the process as well as how one prepares for, and how CCAMP can also help those who align with the Carbex mandate to prepare for to apply for funding when the calls are out. So with that, I would request Vishal to first make his presentation.
Thank you, Nandita. I hope I am audible.
If you can speak a little louder, that would be useful.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, fine.
Kindly remove your mask if it may help.
Okay. Yeah, I hope this is better.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Nandita, for that introduction. I think given we all had lunch now, so let's use that energy. So I think Dr. Tasleem would have touched upon this, that we at CCAMP are basically focusing on life sciences as a key area for making kind of impact that we desire, and we do this through different programs. So one such program is, we offer technology resources for academia, startups, and industry. We also do in-house research where we develop technologies ourselves in tie-up with academia, which are aimed towards startups and industry for assimilation. And then finally, we also do these whole bunch of programs which are aimed at entrepreneurs, aspiring innovators, etc., for taking their ideas to the market. And today's talk is largely focused on the third vertical here. Luckily, I sort of work in all three, so I decided to touch upon all of them. Having said that, AMR is a key focus area in all the three domains of these, and feel free to get in touch, and I'd be happy to talk about how we are also looking at AMR through the first two activities, while we focus on the third aspect in this talk. Okay, so today I, as Nandita mentioned, would talk about different funding programs that are there at CCAMP, which are open for all innovations which are aimed at solving any particular key area within the ambit of antimicrobial resistance. So by innovations in AMR, I mean all sort of things like drugs, devices, diagnostics, etc. Okay, so I think this slide to me sort of summarizes what funding means for any idea out there, right? And when we talk about funding, we have these few questions more often than not. What is the funding? From where are we going to get it? How much is the amount? How do you apply? And when does it come? So we'll go through these small little things also. CCAMP, through its last 10 years of running these different programs and its interaction with very different organizations, agencies, and partners, is now at the center of all these other agencies and partners which CCAMP collaborates with, does tie-ups with, which now are sort of open for anyone out there to think about innovations in life sciences, with AMR being a key area within that domain. So here is a list of some of these partners. We'll touch upon some of these funding programs. These is a summary of some of the funding programs that CCAMP offers. So there are funding opportunities where CCAMP directly connects you and the funding agency, and in some cases CCAMP can facilitate the funding through funding from investors, venture capital, angel investors, etc. So we will be largely limiting to the top portion here. And here you would see this line, this early stage funding, bridge funding, and acceleration or scale up funding. I'll go through what do we mean by those. So within this entire ambit, except for these two which have been marked dark now, all other schemes in a way are open for AMR innovators. Any innovation targeting any particular key area in AMR is open, can be supported by any of these funding schemes. Okay, so covering few basics. When we talk about innovations, given each innovator is comes up with an innovation, and the innovation would be at a different stage of its own maturity, and your funding essentially, etc., or programs that you are applying for would depend on what level of maturity have you already reached and where you intend to go from here on. So innovation process by itself is divided in these discrete steps, which we call as technology readiness levels. It's a good thing to know what is the TRL or technology readiness level of your technology at the current stage, and with which scheme you will be able to take it to which TRL levels, and you will be assessed in that manner. So TRL 1 would mean just the pure idea, while TRL 9 would mean your innovation in the market. And then you're going through these different stages of innovation development. So this is a much finer gradation. Instead of going through all these, how about we pick few as sort of the landmarks or milestones? That would be idea to POC to prototype to innovation, and then finally, once you have innovation, you now intend to scale it up to reach the kind of impact society needs and you would like to achieve, right? So the early stage funding essentially deals with idea to proof of concept stages or innovation development. From POC onwards till the time you have innovation ready in your hand is something we call as bridge funding. More often than not, it's also called as seed support. Sometimes seed support also includes early stage funding. So these are sort of loosely fitting terms. Once you have innovation, now you're thinking about accelerating your market, access to market, or you intend to scale up your production, etc. That would be covered in acceleration or scale up support, right? So I'll take an example here. So for instance, in terms of vaccine development, let's take COVID as an example. Idea would be that how we went about 2 years back, that you could use the spike domain of the coronavirus or SARS-CoV-2 as a good vaccine candidate. That would be just a pure idea stage. It really does not mean that it will be. It's something that you're hypothesizing and you would like to follow it up. At POC stage, you would have done some bit of work where you have now shown that yes, under cellular systems or small animal model systems, you are showing there is some progress and it appears to be a good candidate which is holding up against the challenge. While prototype would be the actual vaccine release candidate, which is now ready for trials. And that you would do clinical trials, stage 1, 2, 3, etc. And once it is approved, that would be innovation. Scaling up would be now you are thinking about bringing innovation into this so that now you can increase production or go into a different market, etc. So that would be one way of relating to these terms. We also hear these two words quite frequently: grants and investments. So grants are mostly aid which is given for you to as a support for you to develop your innovation, while investment is a sort of is a support, but where there is a return which is expected by the funders or investors. So early stage funding is mostly grants, while once you have a POC in your hand, the kind of funding that you're likely to see must be mostly of investment type, where there will be an element of equity or royalty, etc., built into the funding program itself. So, as Lantita talked about, how we go about pitching these ideas. So what is expected from every basic proposal out there when you are pitching an idea for innovation at any stage, right? It could be at early stage or prototype. You basically have three things which divide your proposal or your idea. One is the scientific aspect of the overall proposal, then there is a business side of it, and then the team. And what is expected from you is that within the scientific domain, within the scientific part of your proposal, you should explain what is the idea, why is this idea important, how you intend to create the innovation and take it forward. In business plan, you would be making a case that how is this product, how the product will be commercialized, when and where it will be commercialized, what all have you done and thought about to facilitate the process once you reach there. And in team, you are trying to build in confidence that you have the capabilities of developing and delivering this innovation as part of your team. Right. So this is expected in each proposal at every stage, regardless if it is early stage funding or investment or late stage funding. A basic proposal is supposed to do this. Now, what's the difference between a good proposal and a basic proposal, right? So a good proposal brings in further granularity. It sort of expands upon the things and tries to highlight the impact and your preparedness towards solving that problem. And it builds more confidence that you are the key person. If this innovation is to be supported, you should be the one who should be given this grant or investment, right? So within the scientific idea, now you're bringing in these multiple aspects. So first is you're starting off with a need. You have to justify that there is a clear need for the problem that you're trying to solve, and you are listing out exactly the given problem that you will be solving. So within a domain, you are highly unlikely to solve everything, right? Not one innovation will do that. What you will be doing is that you will be targeting a given problem statement and you will be basically solving that. So for instance, with an AMR also, could you diagnose drug-resistant bacteria within a kind of sample? It's a specific problem statement which talks about just one particular aspect, and then you will go deep into it. So having this focus helps you or segregates you from someone who would just talking about how AMR is important, how solving AMR is important, and how you need innovations at every stage. This is all known, right? What is it that you are bringing on the table? What particular aspect of problem that you are solving? Be clear with it. And given if there is a problem, there must be some solutions out there. And given the problem is still persisting, these solutions are inadequate in one way or the other. So for instance, is the solution available, but it's very costly. So now you would like to develop something which is more affordable, or the solution does not work in certain scenarios. You want to pitch a solution which will work in those scenarios. So you have to talk about the specific problem, the specific solutions which do exist, what are their specific drawbacks or shortcomings, which now you are pitching your solution against and saying that you will be able to cover up these drawbacks or failures. You are also likely to, by all means, explain that your solution is novel, something that hasn't been done before. And there is a clear impact in it, so that you are solving something which is worth solving, and it is not something very trivial. You are backing it up with enough of science which holds up water in that, on that day. It is well known with whatever you are claiming, science backs it up. So it appears feasible, and you are well aware of the competition in terms of other tools, as I mentioned, in terms of solutions. How is your solution better? So are you solving something which wasn't solved before, or are you solving it at a much lesser cost than something else which was already out there but which wasn't affordable? So within the scientific idea, you should touch upon, or you must touch upon, all these things. If you do that, your proposal is obviously a good proposal. Within the business aspect, you should clearly know who's your user and who's your buyer. So for instance, a pill maker, the people who would be taking the pill are your users, but they may not necessarily be your buyer. Your buyer would be a large pharma company, right? So what all different pharma companies which work in that domain will be, you can pitch your idea to, or would be happy to take your idea forward or your innovation forward. You should know already. You should know all of this at the very early stage, and you should build upon this. This is a never-ending exercise which should be continued at every stage. You should be well aware of the market, and within market, you have to understand what is the competition, and B, what are the sort of regulatory compliances which are required for entering A market versus B market, right? So one area versus second area, the regulatory compliances may be different. So for you to be able to enter those market, your science and business have to align with the compliances which are required for that market, and the timeline. It is understood. So for instance, let's say if your ideation at an early proof of principle stage, it's not very clear when will you have this innovation in your head, right? It is understood. But keeping that as a question mark sort of goes against. You should be able to at least articulate that in best case scenario, if everything works out well, I am expected, I'm likely to develop and deliver this innovation in the market in, let's say, next 2 years, 5 years, or in at least this format, and I will be looking for my exit from here on. So for instance, am I happy selling off my POC or at prototype? I don't want to do clinical trials, or do I want to do clinical trials on my own? All of this essentially forms part of your business plan, and having this clarity early on helps you. It helps you even secure funding, right? Because the funders, regardless whether it is grant or investment, understands that you clearly know what you are doing. And as I said, you are the best person, appears to be the best person for this, solving this particular problem. When it comes to team, a good proposal highlights the scientific and the business expertise that the team possesses in terms of the members of the team and the advisors of the team. Again, bringing in that far-sightedness at as early stage as possible to convince your funders that you have thought about all that is required and is well placed to tackle this innovation development, the tedious process of innovation development. So now coming to the grants and investment part, how does a proposal varies from when you, let's say, applying for a grant or when you're applying for investment? Grants, as I said, is mostly early stage. So there you are mostly focusing upon the scientific aspect. You will need to highlight all the 4-5 key points that have been written, but you also do not move away from business plan. Business plan also have to be there and in as good a form as possible. In investment, the role sort of reverses because now you must be in a late stage of innovation development. So you can't just talk about science all the time. You have to now understand how you will enter the market, who are your users and buyers, while keeping the freshness of scientific idea intact. You should still appear novel. You have the either an IP secured or a well-guarded trade secret, which is not something trivial. And hence, once you enter the market, you will be a key player, right? And in both cases, the importance of team cannot be overstated. It must be highlighted that you have the necessary scientific and the business aspect, business expertise needed for delivering a particular innovation. So with that, let's go back to this list. Essentially, all these funding opportunities that I've listed here, as they are divided in these three categories: early stage, bridge, or scale-up funding. And in more often than not, it's essentially the funding partner changes, the amount changes, but overall criteria of proposal judgment or assessment of proposals or ideas is similar to what I described just now. So now let's move forward. So one key example of early stage funding is the BIG grant or Biotechnology Ignition Grant. Here, the grant is from BIRAC, and it provides you up to 50 lakhs, and it gives you a time period of 18 months for taking your idea to POC stage or proof of concept. The funding comes, or the call opens twice a year in January and July, and remains open for 45 days or so. It's a highly competitive grant. It supports all areas in life sciences and biotechnology. Hence, therefore, infectious disorders, AMR, etc. So they are nicely and strongly represented there. Given the competition, as I said, you will have to highlight your scientific problem and your team as well as the business aspect. So big scheme is essentially meant for ideas which have a clear commercial potential and a societal impact. It is meant for encouraging innovators to take their technologies towards market. It is meant for establishing POC. And the best thing about this particular grant is that nearly anyone and everyone is eligible for applying. This could be senior students, could be PhDs, postdocs, faculty members, independent innovators, or people who are working in company who want to think about creating their own ventures. This is the scheme for them. Right? You don't even have to be trained in science for that matter. Graduation in any area would be welcome. Till the time you're pitching an idea which is in life sciences, pertinent to this talk, something which is in AMR. Okay. For all things related to this scheme, please feel free to write to us at ccamp_big @ccamp.rs.in. I will share these mail IDs towards the end also, but just in case. Given the call opens twice a year, but we are always happy to talk and discuss your ideas at any stage, any time of the year. We'd be happy to look at your proposal. We would be happy to guide you with the grant writing process also. So sooner you connect with us, better. Okay. Next example of funding opportunity would be a funding opportunity that we have called Startup India Seed Fund Scheme, SISFS. It is from Startup India, and it's done in collaboration with DPIIT, or Department of Promotion for Industry and Internal Trade. Key areas of relevance here are agriculture, biotechnology, and healthcare, which means AMR clearly. It could be AMR for human healthcare, it could be AMR in agriculture also, or AMR relevant tools for environment also.
Right. Vishal, just another 2-3 minutes if you can.
Okay, I'll be now rushing through. Now mostly the name of the schemes now. So it offers a grant as well as investment. So up to 20 lakhs is grant, or if you're looking for investment, it offers you 50 lakhs. Call is open round the year. Feel free to write to us. The next example is something called TIDE, Technology Incubation and Development of Entrepreneurs. It's a grant basically. It offers 4 lakhs for idea to POC, or 7 lakhs for prototype to MVP development. It also offers investment for late stage startups. It's most aimed at digital health, so digital solutions which are which you are using for tackling AMR are welcome here. So, for instance, AI-based drug development in AMR would be welcome here. For bridge funding opportunities, 2 partners. One is BIRAC again, which is BIRAC Seed Fund, which offers you 30 lakhs, and then one from Niti Aayog, which offers you 12.5 lakhs. Both of them are post POC. Calls are open round the year. Then there is another one, which is Nidhi Seed Support System called Nidhi SSS. This offers 25 lakhs, but there is a possibility of funding being increased up to 1 crore. Call is open around the year. AMR is a welcome area here. For scaling up, two options. One is LEAP, which is from BIRAC, and then one is a tie-up of CCAMP with the Japanese venture capital firm called Beyond Next Venture. The LEAP offers you funding up to 1 CR, while in DNV, the CBIH, the CCAMP BNB Innovation Hub, offers you funding up to 1.5 CRs. The call for LEAP is open around the year, so feel free to get in touch, while BNB, CBIH is call opens twice a year, so keep an eye on our Twitter page. So these would be the mail IDs that I was talking about. For all seed funding schemes at CCAMP, feel free to reach out. You can visit our page, which is ccamp.us.
Can you please show the last slide, the previous slide? Sure, thank you.
For BIG scheme in particular, there is ccamp_BIG@ccamp.us.in. While for all things funding, including BIG, you can always write to us at ccamp.us.in. The QR code is for a page if you are interested in looking at how do you approach us for. Thank you.
Thanks, Vishal. I think if you'll stay back, right, and after Swati's talk, we'll take questions for both the sessions. Please do put in your questions in the chat box, and after Swati's talk, we'll address all the questions together. Thanks. Swati?
Yeah, thanks, Nandita, and good afternoon to all of you. My talk is going to be centered around the funding opportunity offered by CARBEX. And as Nandita mentioned earlier.
Excuse me, can I say something? Actually, the chat box is disabled. We are not able to type in the chat box. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Meghna, you look, just see what is happening.
Okay, I think
now, yes, thank you.
Yes, okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. Thanks, Nandita. So, as I was saying, CCAMP is a proud member of the Global Accelerator Network of CARBEX. And through CCAMP, a lot of the opportunities that CARBEX offers is, excuse me, is also available to innovators in India. And my talk is going to be centered around that. Due to certain network issues, I've requested Meghna to kindly share my slides for me. Thank you, Meghna. If you could put it in slideshow mode, thank you. Yes, so these are the information that is shared by CARBEX, and I'm presenting that to you. The last funding round that CARBEX had announced was in 2019 before the pandemic hit, and a lot of the information that I'll be sharing remains the same, and with a few updates. So the funding, every time funding round brings some element of difference, but we get to know that only once the funding is announced. However, the broader framework of the CARBEX call remains the same, and that is what we're going to be discussing today. Next, please. So we will discuss about CARBEX in brief, about the funding works and the funding round in details, including the priority areas, and we'll close with question answers. Next, please. Also, what has been discussed is CARBEX itself is funded by multiple agencies across the world, and different mandates and different project areas have been identified through the funders, and that is what CARBEX, the mandate of CARBEX also firms up and is brought out in its funding calls. Next, please. So CARBEX has had a mandate of investing about 550 million in 2016 and to 2021. And this was later updated because of changes brought on by the pandemic and a little bit of course correction there of US 480 million. is to be invested in the period of 2016 to 22. They provide a non-dilutive funding and accelerator support, meaning whatever is funded by CARB-X, there is no equity or parting with ownership because of that, so which is non-dilutive in nature. And accelerator support is provided right from the early stage of development up to maturation, and we'll come to that. It's different for the different segments of antibiotics, diagnostics, vaccines, and other life-saving drugs. Since its establishment in 2016, CARB-X has already announced about 110.8 million in award, plus many milestone-based funding support as well. Next, please. And this number is constantly evolving as the number of portfolio companies increase. Now, this was the case in 2015, where it had 29 projects across 5 countries. It now supports 92 projects in 12 countries, and 9 of them have already graduated. Graduated means have gone through the different stages and different milestones committed at the time of funding, and now have moved out of CARB-X support and at the level of maturity that it had committed to CARB-X at the start of the application. In July 2021, CARB-X closed its 5th financial year with about 361 million awarded to 25 projects. Next, please. Meghna, you can go to the next slide. Yeah. No, yeah. This is the funding support and the success over the past 5 years. As I mentioned, $361 million have already been awarded in different projects. 9 projects have already graduated, 2 have secured regulatory approvals, 1 is already in phase 2, and so forth. And it has a very popular application rate of 1163, which even qualified for a review. And ultimately, the ones which were selected were, of course, very less. And we'll come to know through all the stages that it is reviewed, and what you would have to kind of consider at the time of application and progressing through the different stages of the application before hopefully it is accepted for funding support. Next, please. This is a quick snapshot of a few of the portfolios that CARB-X has and how it has progressed post support across different milestones, be it in, for example, 3 in phase 1 clinical trial, plus 3 graduated in the clinic, 12 focused on new classes of antibiotics, 8 non-traditional projects, including 2 microbiomes, 11 new molecular targets, 5 rapid diagnostics, and 1 vaccine. And this has further gone through many more changes, because we are still awaiting the CARB-X annual report, which will come at the end of their financial cycle, which is from August to July. So this year's report is due, and we are expecting a large change in these numbers as well. Next, please. As of 31st July 2021, which was the financial year closure or a cycle closure for CARB-X, it had an active portfolio of about 60 projects. 19 were in antibiotics with novel classes, 16 in non-traditional therapeutics, 12 vaccines and preventatives, 12 in rapid diagnostics, 1 with unique enhancement to existing class, and 25 new awards in FY21. So total 25. This is what we have already discussed. CCAMP is proud to be one of the one of the 10 world-class accelerators across the world. And through this network, the projects or the innovations supported also kind of get an extension to the subject matter experts in the field in which they are working, as well as other network leverage that each of the GAN members bring in to the PDs or the product developers funded by CARBEX. Next, please. The CARBEX advantage. So, as already mentioned, it's the world's largest early development and antibacterial portfolio. It holds the world's largest early development antibacterial portfolio. It has an entrepreneurial culture, accelerating the most needed through different aspects of funding, business support, technical support, and regulatory support. It addresses some of the most dangerous bacterial pathogens, which have been identified through the different reports as crucial for the fight against drug resistance. It also brings in investment community, policymakers, and the PDs stand to gain valuable insight into the potential, arena of policy making and investments in the different geographies they want to expand into. And on the other side, the policymakers and investment community from those geographies also get insight into the potential new products, science and technology that CARBEX is supporting. So it's a two-way interaction where at the time of the support, both get visibility into each other's work, and this kind of is promoted to help it expand once the innovations graduate out of the CARBEX portfolio. And CARBEX has a bias towards innovative and groundbreaking projects. So if you're able to convince, and we'll go through that in the subsequent slides, the different aspects that CARBEX wants in its potential PDs or the product developers, you stand a chance to have your most innovative solutions funded through them. Next, please. CARBEX funds, as you have already seen in the portfolios that we shared and the board, but it is mandated to support innovations in the field of antimicrobial resistance. But this could span across antibiotics and therapeutics, preventions, preventatives like the vaccines, microbiome, antibodies, etc., and also rapid diagnostics with a tilt towards pathogen identification and antibiotic sensitivity testing. It is very focused on antimicrobial resistance. It is guided by the priority pathogen list, which is available by CDC and WHO, and the funding calls, different funding calls might have a certain preference for a particular pathogen for the different aspect that it funds, and that will be known at the beginning of the funding call. But overall, this is the list which guides any funding decision. Next, please. So from the early stage, CARBEX is willing to take many innovations post certain stages, but it does not definitely fund basic research or fundamental research or even validation research. There has to be a certain level of proof of concept and clinical development that are prerequisites that is also available on the website, and we encourage you to also get in touch with us if you have any further questions on that. But barring the very early stage funding, the rest of the entire pipeline is supported in therapeutics and preventatives as well as in diagnostics. CARB-X also has a certain limit till which it will fund or support the innovations. For example, in therapeutics, it does not fund beyond phase 1 clinical trials, and anything going into phase 2 has to have the innovator or the startup should have had made inroads into investments or funding support post phase 1, but till phase 1 is what CARB-X would support. Similarly for diagnostics, so the beginning and the end point is determined, but there's a huge spectrum of stages that is available which CARB-X funds. Next, please. So the funding decisions are made through a globally competitive projects, and as you would have already made out how the number of applications received and how it kind of tapers to the ones which are finally accepted, and these projects or applications are screened through a scientific advisory review board and who make the recommendations, and the joint oversight committee makes the final funding decision. Next, please. Funding. Now, although there is a wide variety of innovations that CARB-X funds, but a priority for applicants which have a legal entity. There is also a requirement to show that the innovator himself or herself is invested into the innovations. So they would ideally like to see that at least 20% of the cost of the entire project is contributed through the innovator's own resources, and also there is a requirement to show that the innovator can take care of that 20% of the cost if need be. So there are certain documents that are required, and this is basically if you can put it, the skin in the game, where they would fund a large chunk of the project cost, but they would also require that the innovator or the startup shows the capacity to be able to fund the remaining 20%. It is given as a sub-award, a contract, and the innovator has to show that it has the freedom to operate. It has all the intellectual property rights to operate the project. It has the capability of running the project in the in the areas that it is saying, and it has the requisite permissions and regulatory approvals to do that in the time being committed for the deliverables being committed. Having said that, the applicants from academia and non-commercial centers are also encouraged to apply. Next, please. They have to show us, a similar expectation is also they have to demonstrate as for the industry partner. In addition to all the aspects that we just covered for, a legal entity or a commercial entity, of the freedom to operate, having the rights, being, having the capacity and capability to undertake the projects, having the requisite partnerships, licenses, and so forth. But in this case, the capability in commercial sense with the applicant wants to use should also be detailed out, and a similar thing of financial commitment of up to 20% is expected in this case as well. As we already mentioned, the very early stage project and basic research is not part of the scope of CARB-X funding. There are certain aspects which are detailed out by CARB-X, and we'll not go into much of these details, but we'll encourage you to also visit the website. A lot of information is also available on the CARB-X website, where certain adherence to the regulatory requirements detailed out has to be adhered to in terms of clinical trials, in terms of experimentation on large animals and so forth. And this has to be incorporated and pre-planned before the budget is submitted to CARB-X. Next, please. There is also a component within CARB-X. Now we saw that CARB-X itself is funded and supported by many different credible international agencies, and one of them is UK AID. And besides the normal CARB-X application, there is a niche area in the application process called the Official Development Assistance, or the ODA, which is supported by the UK AID. And this is specifically for innovations which are aimed at LMICs, or the low and middle income countries. And to apply within the CARB-X funding for the ODA, the innovator, the startup, has to show that how the intervention is designed for resource poor settings, and how it is addressing a pathogen which is in at high incidence rate in the LMICs, and how the innovation can be available at reduced cost to the people who most need it in the LMICs, and there might be other questions as well. So just to flag off that this area within CARB-X which is specifically for innovations aimed for LMICs. Next, please. We'll not go into too much detail on this. This details out within the UK AID support what are the different pathogens, different areas of support that they would consider. So definitely you could go through it in detail on the website as well. Yeah. Next, please. So taking you very quickly through the different stages of funding. Once the cycle or the funding call is declared, CCAMP, which is CARB-X GAN members, and the other GAN members would announce it through in their networks that CARB-X funding round has been announced, and these are the priorities that have been detailed out for this particular funding round, and all the details associated with how to apply and the dates to apply and so forth will be shared in the network. This will be followed by the first step, which is expression of interest, which is a very short format for all the potential applicants or potential applicants who would make to next round. They have to give a very short description in the expression of interest. This is reviewed by CARB-X scientific committee and the funding committee, and the results are announced. So this is where the tapering really starts. A subset of those who had applied will be invited to call and for submission of the short form. Not everyone who applies for EY gets to fill the short form. The short forms itself again goes through a similar process of review by CARB-X, scientific and funding committee, and a further smaller subset is invited to fill the long form of the application. This is where at each stage the global accelerator networks such as CCAMP would handhold the applicants at different stages to be able to fill out these applications in the way that CARB-X requires, and also kind of challenging them to kind of also think through a lot of the things that they might not have initially thought through. So this is a kind of a project where the GAN members also support the applicants. This will be followed by the final review, and then the final funding decision is made. Next, please. In the last funding call, which was in 2019, there were 4 funding rounds that were called, and if you see within the same year at different time points, the funding calls were made with very different mandates, and the same process of EOI, short form, long form, and final funding decision is taken for all of them separately. So each funding round has its own process that is followed, and the support which is offered is different. And here, the first funding round, as you see, was non-traditional approaches, followed by vaccine and biotherapeutics, diagnostics, and finally, direct-acting small molecules. So what is expected out of each of the funding calls is also made explicitly clear at the time of. And the only way to apply is through the CARBEX website. And we'd highly encourage you to go through that link.
Swati, another 2 minutes if you can conclude.
Yeah, so I think we have already discussed this in detail, where the funding round and what it entails will be definitely detailed out further for each of the calls. For example, the non-traditional approaches, microbiome, nucleic acid antisense, and all the things which come within the scope of that round will be mentioned. Yeah, you could skip the next few slides, Meghna, which talks about the same thing as what the details will be. Yeah, just stop there. So for each of the funding rounds and the sub focus areas within each will be detailed out. This I would go through very quickly the process. Next slide, please. So the expression of interest would be a very brief description of the entity and their funding source and what the idea that they are proposing. Next slide, please. And also the pathogen that they want to address. If they are looking for support for LMIC specific innovation, they would mention it here. Also the funding in terms of what is already available, how they are funded, and what is the expectation out of a project. Next slide, please. Once the applicant, yeah, you could go to the next slide. Once the applicant processes this, the next stage is the short form, in which very briefly they are supposed to outline the quad chart their innovation, then also give profile of the competitive and differentiation matrix of their product, the go and no-go milestones, and the project structuring process through the entire duration that they are proposing. So they really, the CARBEX really encourage you to have thought through the entire stage of how you're going to be executing, what are your milestones and the cost associated, and your end deliverable. Next, please. Also, a very high level budget at this stage, you're not required to submit a detailed budget, but a risk register as an example of having thought through all the problems that could potentially occur and how you address them. Next slide, please. The final is whichever innovators make it to the long form stage, very few of them get to fill out all the details that they had been asked in the short form in a much more expanded form. Next slide, please. And this would include defining the milestones and point-to-point response on what was asked from them by the reviewers in the short form stage, and giving a detailed feedback on the same. And at this time, also a detailed budget and a detailed Gantt chart is required for the task that would be undertaken by the project. Next, please. Thank you. Happy to take any questions.
So there are a couple of questions. Just to maybe one this thing which will answer all of it. What Vishal presented, the CCAMP funding, the funding schemes that are dispersed through CCAMP are open to any, is not specific to AMR, but includes AMR also. And the scope there is a little wider than what is available at the CARBEX end. So just making that one statement, and then we'll probably take some questions. I just want, so that answers the first question of Anupama. Then somebody who signed in as Dell says funding supports for animal husbandry. So that would probably not come under CARBEX scope, but would come under the CCAMP, some of the CCAMP funding, right, Vishal?
Yes, so as I had written also, almost all of the funding programs are open for life sciences and biotechnology in general, which includes animal health, human health, environment, etc. Except for the digital health program, I think all other are sort of sector agnostic, broadly into life sciences, while Carbex is purely AMR.
Carbex, another question from Raghavendra. Carbex projects support, do Carbex projects support AMR in case of steroid drugs also?
Can I share my view?
Swati? Can we finish the Q&A, Swati?
Yes, so at the time of the funding call, as I said, the focus areas, the thematic focus areas for each of the call is defined. Now, if you're asking for a very specific aspects of steroid drugs, it has to fall under the scope of which pathogen is it really for, what is the indication that is being addressed. Also, all the funding calls might not be applicable for across the board of all innovations that Carbex supports. So at the time of the funding call, the details are given out, and
what about neuronal drugs?
Neuronal drugs, so far in the portfolio, I have not seen any, but that does not say that they won't be supported further on. But yeah, that's a difficult question to answer. I didn't see any portfolio as supported on.
Then would an external part-time student be eligible to apply for funding? Vishal, would you like to go first?
In BIG, certainly yes. Till the time you have a graduation degree, you are eligible. Apart from that, all other funding schemes that we discussed were mostly for startups. So then you will have to register a company. But BIG is open.
Swati?
Hello.
So Carbex requires a legal entity like a startup to apply, and although it is available to academicians and non-commercial partners, but individuals are not supported through Carbex because of the granularity that they ask in terms of expertise, capacities, and the ability to be able to take the innovation forward and scale. So it does not fund individuals, but has a preference for legal entities to be supported, who can potentially scale the solution further.
To apply for Carbex, what TRL level is necessary for therapeutics? Do you need in vitro data in place?
Yes. So as I discussed in the earlier slide, barring very early stage funding and post phase 1 funding, everything in between is something that is supported or is considered for support by Carbex.
Carbex projects support to antimicrobial peptide glues.
Antipeptides, yes, there are certain portfolios that are already there in the Carbex. There are certain PDs. I'm not sure about the peptide glues. I'm sorry, I won't be able to answer that.
Please share the list of funding available throughout the year. Nagamani, we would request you to stay in touch with our funding team. I think Vishal has shared the email ID.
I have also copied the link in the chat box.
Yeah, can check the chat box. Zahid, when is the next Carbex funding call expected? Swati?
I think all of us have that question in mind, and that is some information that comes from the Carbex headquarters. And as and when it comes, and hopefully soon, CCAMP as a GAN member would be the first to let you know through its different networks and communicate.
So please do follow us on social media.
Yeah, please stay tuned. As soon as that information comes out, we'll be sharing it.
How is it to be applied for affordable product funding?
That's a question.
Yeah, I think that just depends on all the other parameters. I don't think there is anything specific for something that is affordable. Definitely, it's a advantage if you're able to demonstrate that a product is affordable. Is it possible to get fund based on PCR based molecular diagnostics of AMR?
I'm assuming that I can take that question,
Yeah,
and Vishal, if you want to kind of pitch in. Yeah, so PCR-based diagnostics definitely fall under the scope of what CARB-X funds. But if you remember, when I was showing the different matrices that they analyze at different stages of the application, one was also the competitive edge and how does it compare to the other innovations which are available. And if you're able to answer that convincingly, that is when you have a chance of convincing the scientific committee and funding committee that what you are proposing and what they would support can actually be competitively out there in the market and has the ability to scale as well without any market threats, so as to say. So with that amount of granularity, if you're able to convince, it can go forward, but it definitely is within the scope.
Vishal, would you like to say something?
Till the time you can, thank you. So till the time you can project that there is first a scope of IP. If it is, then clearly by all means. If not, how is it not something that anyone else can do? So what is your trade secret? Right? If there is something that's giving you edge and it's solving the problem, then you can certainly apply for a majority of the funding or almost all of the funding options. So if it is as generic as PCR, the problem is always will be on the IPA front. Anybody
Are incubators from other incubators eligible for applying to funding to any of these schemes?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Anybody can apply. CARB-X funded, okay, this is Dr. Manish. CARB-X funded Lytica Therapeutics to develop he's probably just sharing this information about the person who asked about antibacterial peptides. CARB-X has funded a company, Lytica Therapeutics, that has developed antibacterial peptides. So the person who asked the question, you may want to look up that for more details.
Okay, so antibacterial peptide definitely there, but I think the person had asked for antibacterial
glues,
which is something that we don't know. But yeah, definitely please do check out the portfolio of the companies which are supported by CARB-X.
Yeah, I think I've covered all. I'm not sure if anybody has raised their hands. With this coming to the end of this session
I have a question. Dr. Swati.
Sorry?
I have a question. So can I ask?
Yeah, Dr. Rehan, please go ahead.
Yeah. So as an academician, can I apply for the CARB-X funding? Or do I still need to have a team?
Still need to have a?
Team members.
Team. So CARB-X definitely has a preference for legal entities to apply, but it is also open to the academic and the non-commercial entities to apply, provided they can show the same level of the IP freedom to operate, whether they have the capacity and capability to scale if they are funded, the regulatory approvals if they are able to take. So it would require a team. It will never be a single person doing that. And also in case of the academic and non-commercial entities who apply and who might be supported, they would have to show additionally that if they would want to license it out, or technology transfer, or exit strategy, if they want to initially be involved and then kind of come out, they do not have further commercial interest in the product. So that is an additional level of information that could be required by the academic or the non-commercial entity.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot, Vishal and Swati, for sharing, I think, what is probably the most important aspects and about funding, and request all of you to do stay tuned to our all our social media posts, because we announce all the calls, etc. there. And for any other funding which is not related to Carbex, please do get in touch with Vishal and his team. With that, again, thanks a lot, Vishal. Thanks a lot, Swati. And Swati, you brought up the nice segue